Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into the week's biggest stories. The science, the global shifts, the tech, everything that really reshapes how you might see the world.
And it's quite the mix this week. Really stark contrast.
Yeah.
On one side, you've got these almost unbelievable leaps in human innovation. Right. Single injections curing diseases.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we're seeing military tensions, geopolitical standoffs, scaling up faster than we've seen in, well, decades. Since the Cold War, really.
It's a strange split, isn't it? Like, we're getting incredibly good at fixing our own internal code, our biology.
Exactly.
But our ability to sort out disagreements between, large groups of people, between nations, that seems stuck, gridlocked almost.
And that's our job today, right? To cut through that complexity, give you the context you need.
Yeah.
We're going from the tiny scale gene editing ancient bits of the brain through big picture worries about the AI market bubble, and then straight into these, frankly, potentially world-changing diplomatic moves in places like the Middle East and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we've got some huge physics breakthroughs, a real reality check on AI investment that actually shook the markets quite a bit.
It really did.
And of course, the latest on the U.S. government shutdown situation and how that's even impacting things like air travel. So let's dive in. Where better to start than with health, that big promise. Okay, segment 1. The biomedical revolution.
Right. And if you want a story that just screams paradigm shift, you absolutely have to look at the CRISPR gene editing trials for high cholesterol.
Ah, yes. This isn't just a new pill, is it? This is like fundamentally changing the instructions.
Exactly. It's rewriting the genetic script. For, decades, managing high cholesterol meant statins, right? Lifelong pills for millions of people.
Wow, every single day.
Yeah. And now, these early clinical trials, they're seeing a single shot, one administration, dropping harmful cholesterol by 50%. 50.
Wow. And the implication is this could be permanent.
That's the word. Permanent. Instead of just managing symptoms day after day, the tech goes in, finds the specific gene, probably related to that PCSK9 pathway we hear about, and effectively edits it out.
So for potentially millions globally, this isn't just better treatment, it's a cure, a one-and-done fix.
That's the potential, yes.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact on healthcare systems, on individual lives, not needing that lifelong medication. It's moving from managing disease to actually fixing the root genetic cause. It's profound.
Truly profound. And speaking of how things are made, there was another interesting discovery, this one from Singapore, about making drugs more efficiently.
Ah, yes, from the National University of Singapore. Really elegant stuff, actually. It's about using DNA, but not for editing this time, for manufacturing.
Okay.
They found that the phosphate groups in DNA, the backbone, essentially can act as catalysts.
Catalysts for drug synthesis. Why is that a big deal? Chemically speaking.
It boils down to shape. A lot of important drugs, maybe a third of them, are chiral.
Chiral, like mirror images, left hand, right hand sort of thing.
Exactly like your hands. They're isomers. And often, only one hand, one isomer, actually does the job in the body. The other mirror image might be useless or sometimes even harmful. You absolutely need to make only the correct one.
Got it. So you need the right hand drug, not the left hand one.
Precisely. And using these DNA phosphate groups as a catalyst lets scientists guide the chemical reaction to produce just that desired mirror image shape. It's incredibly precise, very efficient.
And that means?
It means less energy used, fewer steps in the process, and critically, way less chemical waste. This is what they call green chemistry, making pharma manufacturing cleaner, more sustainable, and ultimately cheaper. It's a big win for the industry.
That makes a lot of sense. And just quickly, for people who maybe aren't candidates for gene editing yet or don't respond well to statins, there was also news about a new pill for cholesterol, right?
Yes, an experimental daily pill. It's aimed specifically at that group patients, where statins alone just aren't cutting it enough. So yeah, you're seeing innovation attacking cardiovascular disease from really multiple angles.
Good to know. Okay, let's shift from the heart to the head. Mental health. There was a rethink on antidepressants, specifically how quickly they work.
Yeah, this was quite significant. The standard thinking for drugs like sertraline Zoloft is the common brand name, has always been, give it 4 to 6 weeks to really kick in.
Right, that's what you always hear.
But this new analysis, looking at the PANDI clinical trial data, it really challenges that timeline, at least for certain symptoms.
Which symptoms?
The emotional ones. Things like feeling hopeless, that constant distress, the rumination. The studies suggested significant relief from those specific symptoms within just 2 weeks.
2 weeks? That's much faster than expected.
It is. Now, physical side effects or deeper cognitive shifts might still take longer, sure. But the key finding is that rapid psychological stabilization. For patients starting treatment, knowing that emotional relief could come much sooner, that's incredibly valuable information for them and their doctors. It changes the conversation around expectations.
Absolutely. Okay, sticking with the brain. Something about a really old part, like 500 million years old. The brain radar.
Ah, the superior colliculus. Yes, this is where things get really interesting about evolution. It's this primitive little region deep in the midbrain. For ages, scientists kind of dismissed it as just a relay station for vision, sending signals up to the main brain, the cortex.
Just passing messages along.
Pretty much. But this new research shows it's doing way more than that.
Yeah.
It seems to process visual information on its own, independent of the cortex.
Really?
Independently.
Yeah. It heavily influences our instincts,
Yeah.
where we look automatically, how we perceive things instantly, those quick reflexive responses to something visual, maybe a threat, maybe just movement.
So it's not just a messenger, it's got its own intelligence almost.
In a way, yes. An ancient instinctual intelligence. It forces a big rethink about how our brains evolved, suggesting these lower, older structures were maybe more fundamental in developing perception than we assumed. And potentially, this could open up new ways to treat visual disorders by targeting this more basic pathway. Fascinating. The brain. Still so many secrets. And speaking of protecting the brain, there was a breakthrough related to Alzheimer's. Affects 50 million people. That's staggering.
It is, and this involves microglia. These are the brain's own immune cells.
Right. And weren't they sometimes thought to be part of the problem, causing inflammation?
Sometimes, yes, the picture was complicated. But what researchers have found now are specific types of microglia that are actually slowing down the progression of Alzheimer's.
So these are the good guys in the brain's immune response.
You could say that, yeah. The good cops. They seem to be concentrated in the hippocampus, that crucial area for memory. And they're actively working to reduce inflammation and clear out those toxic amyloid proteins associated with the disease.
So the strategy might change, not just attacking the bad stuff, but boosting the good stuff.
Exactly. Instead of only focusing on, say, drugs to eliminate the amyloid plaques, future treatments might try to boost the activity or number of these beneficial microglia, helping the brain fight the disease itself more effectively. It's a really promising shift in perspective.
Definitely sounds like it. Now, shifting gears slightly. An external threat. A long-term study from George Mason University about pesticides.
Yes, a decade-long review focusing on a very common class of insecticides called neonicotinoids.
Ah.
You might recognize names like imidacloprid or acetamiprid. They're widely used in agriculture.
Okay, neonics. What did the study find?
Well, the review looked at 21 animal studies going back to 2015, and it found pretty stark correlations between exposure to these chemicals and male reproductive health problems.
Like what specifically?
Things like reduced sperm quality, disruptions to hormone levels, and even physical damage to testicular tissue in the animals studied.
That sounds serious, especially given the context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We know there's this worrying global trend of declining male fertility and sperm counts. This research doesn't prove causation in humans, obviously, it's animal studies, but it strongly suggests a link and raises a major red flag. It really stresses the need for regulators to take a hard look at these chemicals, given how widespread our exposure is through food.
A public health warning, essentially.
Okay.
And before we leave health, one slightly unexpected positive note about the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, this was interesting. Research looked at kids who have eczema atopic dermatitis, or AD,
Okay.
and it found that the vaccinated children with eczema actually had lower rates of other infections later on and fewer allergic issues like asthma or allergic rhinitis compared to unvaccinated kids with eczema.
Huh. So beyond just protecting against COVID.
It suggests the vaccine might have this broader, sort of beneficial immune modulating effect, especially for kids who already have chronic inflammation like eczema, an unexpected positive finding.
All right, let's move into segment 2. Tectonic shifts. We've talked about controlling biology. Now let's talk about the machines and the physics behind them. And we have to start with artificial intelligence. The mood seems to be shifting on Wall Street, doesn't it?
Oh, dramatically. The word bubble is being thrown around quite openly now, even by heavy hitters like Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan. He explicitly said the current AI investment frenzy feels very similar to past bubbles.
That's a pretty blunt warning. Is there data to back up that skepticism?
There is. You see these huge investment projections, like $1.1 trillion just for U.S. companies between 2026 and 2029. Massive numbers.
Yeah.
But the reality on the ground, an estimated 95%, 95, of firms investing heavily in AI are seeing no tangible returns yet, zero.
95%.
Yeah.
So why not? Where's the disconnect? They're spending billions. What's the problem with the business model?
The core problem seems to be the cost of running the AI, what they call inference. Training these huge models is expensive, yes, but that's a one-off, more or less.
Right.
But every time a user asks the AI a question, every time it generates text or an image, that costs money, computing power, energy. It's an ongoing operational cost.
So scaling up users means scaling up costs massively.
Exactly. And right now, for many applications, especially free or low-cost consumer ones, the cost of providing the service far outweighs any revenue coming in. Wall Street's waking up to the fact that this isn't, a high-margin software business right now. It's more like a very high-cost utility almost.
And then something specific triggered a sell-off recently, a competitor.
Yes, that was the catalyst for the latest jitters. The launch of DeepSeek, a Chinese AI chatbot positioned as a low-cost alternative.
Okay.
That immediately sent shockwaves through the market. It was a stark reminder that technological leadership isn't guaranteed and that competition, especially on price, can emerge quickly. That news triggered a huge sell-off, wiped nearly $600 billion off NVIDIA's market value alone at one point.
Wow, a $600 billion wake-up call. So if the market's getting nervous and the returns aren't there yet, what are the big AI players doing?
Well, they're looking for help. OpenAI, for example, made a formal request to the Trump administration. They want the CHIPS Act tax credits expanded.
The CHIPS Act, wasn't that for building semiconductor factories, chip fabs?
It was, yes. But OpenAI wants those credits extended to cover the construction of their massive AI data centers.
I see. The logic being.
Reduce their enormous build-out and operational costs, basically. They argue it's necessary to maintain U.S. leadership in AI and speed up infrastructure development.
But that opens up a whole other debate, doesn't it? Using taxpayer money via tax credits to subsidize these huge energy-hungry data centers. There are major environmental and ethical questions there.
Absolutely. It's a direct clash between wanting to lead in innovation and dealing with the very real sustainability costs of that innovation. A tough balancing act.
And this tension, this sort of human versus machine anxiety, it's showing up in culture, too. I saw something about the creator of Breaking Bad.
Yeah, Vince Gilligan. His new show, Pluribus, apparently has a very pointed disclaimer in the credits.
What does it say?
Something like made by humans.
Huh. That's pretty direct.
It's absolutely a statement. It reflects that deep unease in Hollywood and other creative fields about AI potentially taking over jobs, messing with intellectual property, the very nature of creativity. Gilligan's basically drawing a line in the sand, publicly siding with human creators.
Interesting times. Okay, let's switch from AI to, well, the fundamental nature of reality. Quantum physics. There was a discovery described as bizarre.
Oh, this one is genuinely mind-bending. Researchers observed something called quantum oscillations in a material that should absolutely not show them. It was an electrical insulator.
Wait, hang on. Insulators. They don't conduct electricity, right? That's the definition. And quantum oscillations, those are normally seen in metals, in conductors.
Exactly. Quantum oscillations depend on electrons being free to move around and respond to magnetic fields in a particular way.
Yeah.
But insulators, electrons are basically locked in place. That's why they insulate.
So how can an insulator show oscillations?
That's the bizarre part. This specific material, a dipolar excitonic insulator, showed these periodic changes in its electrical resistance, which is the signature of quantum oscillations. It suggests this material has this incredible dual nature.
Like it can be both an insulator and sort of a conductor at the same time, or switch between them?
Precisely. It implies it can transition between insulating and conducting phases under certain conditions. It doesn't just bend the rules of electrical conductivity, it kind of breaks them.
So what are the implications, beyond just confusing physicists?
Well, it forces a fundamental rethink of how we understand electron behavior in materials. And practically, it could open up completely new ways to design electronics, sensors, and especially components for quantum computers, which often need materials with really exotic properties like this.
Okay, quantum weirdness continues. And speaking of materials for quantum tech, Stanford had something about an extraordinary crystal.
Yes, strontium titanate, or STO. It's a type of material called a perovskite oxide. The key finding is that it shows amazing optical and mechanical properties, especially stability, when cooled down to near absolute zero temperatures.
Which is crucial for
quantum computing systems, advanced lasers, sensitive detectors, basically anything that needs to operate reliably in those extreme cryogenic environments. Plus, if you dope STO, add tiny amounts of other elements, it shows promise for superconductivity. So they're really foundational material for a lot of next-gen tech.
Got it. And also on the tech front, progress in lasers, making them smaller, more efficient.
That came out of the University of Stuttgart in Germany. They developed a short pulse laser that achieves about 80% efficiency. That's remarkably high for this type of laser.
How'd they manage that?
They used a clever multipass design, basically bouncing the light back and forth within the laser cavity very effectively. The big benefit is that high efficiency means less wasted heat and lower power needs, allowing them to build a much more compact, portable system.
Portable lasers. Applications.
Think portable medical diagnostic tools, field analytics for environmental science, maybe even compact quantum sensors you could take out of the lab. Anywhere you need precise laser pulses but can't lug around a huge, power-hungry machine.
Makes sense. Okay, quick check on space before we move to geopolitics. The moon race.
Blue Origin CEO Bob Smith made a very public statement. He said the company would move heaven and earth, his words, to help NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, speed up the Artemis program.
Artemis being the plan to get astronauts back to the moon.
Exactly. So more evidence of that public-private partnership driving things. And meanwhile, SpaceX keeps launching. They put up another batch of 29 Starlink satellites.
How many does that make now?
The active constellation is now over 3,000 satellites, just steadily building out that global internet coverage from orbit.
All right, let's shift focus now to segment 3. Geopolitical flashpoints and diplomatic shifts. From the controlled lab environment to, well, the much messier world stage, starting with Ukraine, where things have escalated dramatically.
Yes, the scale of recent Russian attacks has been truly devastating. Ukrainian sources reported a massive wave, something like 450 drones and 45 missiles in a concentrated period.
Hitting what?
Energy infrastructure, mainly, but also residential areas across major cities, Kyiv, Dnipro, Poltava, Kharkiv, among others. The immediate reports mention at least 7 civilian deaths.
And the targeting of energy. That seems strategic, especially now.
Absolutely calculated. Reports, like one in The Guardian, suggested Ukraine's energy generation capacity was pushed down to effectively zero temporarily. Widespread power cuts, right as winter is biting. And critically, there's concern about Russia hitting nuclear substations.
Not the power plants themselves, but the connections.
Exactly. The infrastructure needed to distribute the power. It's incredibly dangerous, carried inherent risks even if the reactors aren't hit directly. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is watching this very closely. It looks like a deliberate strategy to maximize civilian hardship, break morale in the cold.
And this pressure is having ripple effects in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Germany seems to be preparing very seriously.
Very seriously. Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank, a top German military official, spoke quite openly about their plans. Germany is designated as the main logistical hub for NATO forces if things escalate further.
And they have a specific plan.
Yes, Operations Plan Germany. He mentioned readiness to potentially deploy 800,000 NATO troops through Germany, getting them to the eastern borders within 180 days if needed.
800,000 troops. That's a Cold War level number.
It signifies a major shift in perception. German officials are clearly viewing Russia now not just as a regional problem, but as a direct existential threat to the entire NATO alliance. The rhetoric and the planning reflect that deep anxiety.
And this anxiety extends to the nuclear level, too. There was tension around potential U.S. testing.
Yes, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov voiced concern about what he called a lack of clarity from the U.S. regarding President Trump's orders to prepare for nuclear weapons testing capabilities.
Even if it's just preparation, not actual testing.
Moscow's position is that any ambiguity is dangerous. Lavrov stated Russia would prepare a proportional response if the U.S. were to resume any form of testing, even some critical ones. They maintain they'll stick to the test ban treaty only as long as others do. It's more of that escalatory signaling we keep seeing.
And even among allies supporting Ukraine, there are underlying frictions. Poland had a controversial vote.
That's right. The Polish parliament rejected a bill that would have criminalized the glorification of certain Ukrainian nationalist groups from the World War II era, the OUN and UPA.
Why is that controversial?
Because those groups, while fighting for Ukrainian independence, also collaborated with the Nazis at times and are accused of committing massacres against Polish civilians. So rejecting the bill, while perhaps aimed at maintaining unity with Kyiv now, touches on incredibly deep, painful historical wounds between Poland and Ukraine. It shows how complex these relationships are, even when facing a common enemy.
History casting long shadows. Okay, let's turn to the Middle East, and this is, well, it's a stunning development. The president of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, visiting the U.S.
It's genuinely seismic geopolitically.
Right.
Remember, al-Shara's forces recently overthrew Bashar al-Assad, and al-Shara himself. He was previously a prominent militant leader, actually on the U.S. terrorism blacklist with a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head not that long ago.
From wanted terrorist to official visitor meeting President Trump.
It's an almost unprecedented diplomatic reversal. The speed of it is remarkable.
That's on the agenda for this meeting. It must be high stakes.
Purely strategic, it seems. It's about stability. Discussions are expected to cover potential U.S. help with Syria's reconstruction. The country is devastated, needs something like $216 billion, apparently.
And in return?
Syria, joining the U.S.-led coalition to fight the remaining pockets of ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, and, significantly, agreeing to host a U.S. military base near Damascus.
A U.S. base in Syria near Damascus. Wow.
It signals a complete U-turn in U.S. policy, moving away from isolating Syria towards actively partnering with the new leadership to counter extremism and try to stabilize the country after more than a decade of brutal war. A massive gamble, really.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, the conflict in Gaza continues, tragically. The reported death toll is enormous, over 69,000.
That's the figure being reported from Gaza health authorities,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
And the international pressure and legal scrutiny on Israel's conduct are intensifying significantly.
What specifically?
Two major things surfaced. One, U.S. intelligence reports suggesting that even some Israeli military lawyers had internal doubts about the legality of certain IDF, Israel Defense Forces, actions in Gaza.
Doubts from within their own system?
Reportedly, yes. And that came out around the same time a UN commission accused Israel of actions potentially amounting to genocide. These aren't small claims. They represent immense legal and reputational challenges for Israel on the world stage.
And violence isn't just in Gaza, is it? The West Bank saw another incident.
Yes, a particularly nasty one.
Huh.
Israeli settlers attacked a group of Palestinian farmers harvesting olives. 11 people were injured, and significantly that included journalists and international observers who were there documenting the harvest.
Targeting observers and media, too.
It seems so. These attacks on olive groves are a recurring issue, often seen as attempts to intimidate Palestinians and disrupt their livelihoods, part of that ongoing struggle over land in the occupied West Bank. And it highlights the dangers faced by anyone trying to report on or monitor the situation there.
Okay, finally in this segment, a quick look at political turmoil in Africa, starting in East Africa.
Right. Two Kenyan activists, Bob Njagi and Nicholas Ou, were released after being held for 38 days. They were in Uganda, supporting the opposition leader there, Bobi Wine.
And they were detained by
Ugandan military intelligence, reportedly abducted by masked men. They claimed they were mistreated and falsely accused by the Ugandan government of planning riots. It looks like a case of transnational repression reaching across borders to silence dissent against the Ugandan regime.
and a similar crackdown pattern in Tanzania.
Yes. Following their recent election, President Samia Suluhu Hassan claimed a massive 98% victory, but there were widespread allegations of fraud.
And the government's response to protests?
Mass arrests. Over 200 people, including a senior opposition figure named Amani Galugwa, have been charged with treason. It's a heavy-handed response that's drawn concern from regional bodies like the African Union about democratic backsliding.
Okay, let's bring it back home, so to speak, to domestic political and economic issues, segment 4. In the U.S., the government shutdown continues to drag on. Day 40.
Day 40, yes. And it forced the Senate into a rare weekend session trying to find a way out of the impasse.
And the real-world consequences are hitting hard now, aren't they? Especially travel.
Absolutely. Over the weekend, reports indicated over 2,500 flights were canceled. The direct cause cited was staffing cuts at the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, specifically among air traffic controllers due to the shutdown.
Just shows how interconnected everything is. Political deadlock grounds planes.
It really does. These critical services rely on specialized staff, and you can't just switch them off and on without major disruption and, frankly, safety concerns. It highlights the fragility when the basic functions of government break down.
And in the midst of this, President Trump is pushing hard on procedural changes in the Senate, the filibuster.
Yes, he's been very vocal, urging Senate Republicans to eliminate the filibuster, the rule that often requires 60 votes to advance legislation, rather than a simple majority. He's arguing it's necessary to break the deadlock, even reportedly saying Democrats are cracking like dogs under his pressure.
Strong language. What's the counter-argument?
That the filibuster, while frustrating, encourages deliberation, and protects minority rights in the Senate. Removing it, the so-called nuclear option, could lead to wilder policy swings with each election and further deepen political polarization. It's a fundamental debate about how the Senate should function.
And President Trump isn't just focused on procedure, he's also reviving his call to replace the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
That's right. Amidst the shutdown chaos, he called on Senate Republicans to essentially scrap the ACA and replace it with a system that sends federal health insurance money directly to consumers.
Instead of through insurers and state programs like now.
Exactly. The idea, philosophically, is to give individuals the money, the subsidies, and let them shop for insurance themselves, maximizing consumer choice, proponents would argue.
But the potential downsides.
Critics warn it would dismantle the current structure that provides protections for pre-existing conditions and regulates the market. They fear millions could lose coverage or face unaffordable plans without the ACA framework. It's reopening that huge fundamental battle over healthcare policy in the U.S.
A battle that never really went away. Okay, shifting across the Atlantic. Europe is facing its own economic pressures, particularly around funding for Ukraine.
Yes, the European Commission delivered a pretty stark warning. They're saying that unless the EU member states find a way to use frozen Russian assets to back loans for Ukraine, there's about $140 billion caught up in this stalemate.
Right.
Then the alternative is likely more joint EU borrowing, which could push up national deficits and debt levels across the bloc. They're stuck between needing to fund Ukraine and risking their own financial stability.
And Russia's reaction to using their frozen assets.
Predictably furious, Moscow has flat out called it theft and explicitly threatened to retaliate against Western assets still held within Russia if the EU moves forward. It puts the EU in a very tight spot.
Definitely. We also saw some energy diplomacy involving Hungary, Russia, and the U.S.
Yes, Hungary is heavily reliant on Russian energy, gets about 74% of its gas from Russia. After a meeting between their Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, and President Trump, the Hungarians claimed they'd secured an indefinite waiver from U.S. sanctions on Russian oil and gas imports.
Indefinite? That sounds like a big concession.
Well, that was the claim. But almost immediately, a White House official stepped in to clarify that the waiver is actually only valid for 1 year.
Ah, significant difference.
Huge difference. It really underscores Hungary's tricky balancing act trying to keep the energy flowing from Russia while navigating sanctions and maintaining ties with Western allies, a very precarious position.
Indeed. And finally, a big shift in the global auto industry. Japanese companies moving investment.
A major strategic pivot, yes. Japan's big automakers, Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, are collectively investing over $11 billion in India.
Moving away from
China. It's a clear, strategic decision driven by rising geopolitical tensions, supply chain uncertainties, and the risks associated with concentrating too much manufacturing in China right now.
So they see India as a more stable bet long-term.
It certainly looks that way. It's a massive vote of confidence in India's growing market and its potential as a reliable alternative manufacturing base, a significant shift in global economic alignment.
All right, let's turn to segment 5, climate crisis and natural calamities. And here, the contrast between human vulnerability and technological potential is just incredibly stark.
It really is. You look at the situation on the Sikana Atoll in the Solomon Islands. It's devastating. A community of just 300 people facing the literal loss of their homeland.
Due to sea level rise.
Directly. It's not some future projection. It's happening now. Salt water is getting into their freshwater wells, making them unusable. It's ruining the land they used to grow food. The elders there speak about this profound dread of planned relocation.
Having to leave their ancestral home entirely.
Exactly. The government, with help from the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, is developing guidelines for this, trying to manage it. But imagine the cultural loss, the emotional cost. It's immense. Their plight is going to be a key focus at the upcoming UN climate conference, COP30, in Brazil. A real human face on the climate crisis.
Just heartbreaking. And then in sharp contrast, you have nations like Denmark pushing ahead with climate solutions.
Right. Denmark launched its first large-scale production plant for e-methanol.
E-methanol, how does that work?
Basically using renewable electricity, likely from Denmark's abundant wind power, to synthesize methanol fuel. It turns green energy into a liquid fuel that can be used, for example, in shipping, replacing dirty bunker fuel.
So a concrete step towards decarbonizing heavy industry.
Exactly. It's a tangible example of the kind of technological innovation needed to meet climate goals. A model, perhaps, for other countries. That contrast, though, Sikayana facing oblivion, Denmark building green fuel plants. It says a lot about global inequity in the face of climate change.
It certainly does. We also saw the raw power of nature unleashed this week. Super Typhoon Fangwang.
Yes, bearing down on the Philippines. It rapidly intensified, reaching super typhoon status with sustained winds hitting 185 kilometers per hour, a very dangerous storm.
What was the response?
Thankfully, authorities seemed well prepared, especially after the recent deadly typhoon Kalmegi. They evacuated nearly 1 million people from the most vulnerable coastal and low-lying areas, particularly in Aurora province. The Philippines is constantly on the front lines of these increasingly intense storms.
And then something truly unusual happened in Brazil. A tornado.
Highly unusual and incredibly destructive. A powerful tornado struck Paraná state in southern Brazil. Tornadoes of this intensity are rare there.
How bad was it?
Catastrophic for the town of Rio Bonito do Iguacu. Reports say 90% of the town was damaged, essentially flattened, in just minutes. 6 people were killed, over 700 injured. Just a brutal, unexpected reminder of the atmosphere's destructive potential, perhaps linked to changing weather patterns.
Unbelievable destruction. And finally, a tragic story from Indonesia highlighting that conflict between humans and wildlife.
Yes, a really sad incident in Riau province on Sumatra. An 8-year-old girl was trampled and killed by a wild elephant.
Oh no, what's the context there?
It points directly to habitat loss. Riau has seen massive deforestation, largely for palm oil plantations. This pushes the elephants, critically endangered Sumatran elephants, there are only about 300 left in Riau, into smaller areas and inevitably into more frequent, dangerous contact with human settlements. It's a direct consequence of environmental destruction leading to tragedy.
Okay, let's wrap up with segment 6. Some miscellaneous highlights covering crime, culture, and sports, starting with some difficult public safety stories. Florida had a terrible incident.
Yes, in Tampa, Florida. A high-speed police chase ended tragically when the car being pursued crashed into a crowd outside a bar. 4 people were killed, 13 injured. It raises serious questions about pursuit policies, the use of techniques like the PIT maneuver, and the risks involved.
Just awful. And another tragic shooting, this one involving mistaken identity.
In an Indianapolis suburb, yes. A cleaning woman, Maria Florindoli Rios Perez, apparently went to the wrong house by mistake late at night. The homeowner shot and killed her, believing she was an intruder. It immediately reignited those intense debates around stand your ground and self-defense laws and the potential for tragic errors.
Such a sad situation. And a different kind of safety issue. A security lapse in an Indian prison.
Yeah, this was quite shocking. At Parapana Agrahara Central Jail in Bengaluru, India, a high-security prison inmates, including some high-profile ones like an alleged ISIS recruiter and a convicted murderer, were apparently filmed openly using mobile phones, watching TV, just a major breach of security and control within the prison system.
Raises serious questions about corruption or incompetence, surely.
Absolutely. And briefly, looking back at past events, French authorities expanded their anti-terror probe related to Salah Abdeslam, one of the 2015 Paris attackers.
Ahead of the 10th anniversary.
Exactly. It relates to a USB stick found in his possession. It coincides with remembrance events and also studies showing how the trauma from those attacks continues to affect families across generations.
The long tail of trauma. Okay, shifting to something lighter. Culture and maybe celebrity. The lottery got pretty big.
Astronomical, actually. The Mega Millions jackpot surged to $900 million after another drawing with no winner. Lottery fever gripping the nation again.
900 million. Wow, any celebrity news worth mentioning? Keep it brief.
Very briefly, actress Jennifer Lawrence apparently made some comments calling Kourtney Kardashian more annoying than ever.
Yeah.
Just typical celebrity chatter, really.
Right. More interestingly, perhaps, a trend about relationships and social media.
Yeah, an interesting discussion piece about why some women are deliberately choosing not to post pictures or details about their boyfriends online.
Why is that?
Concerns about privacy, avoiding judgment from others, and just resisting the pressure to constantly project this perfect relationship image online, wanting to keep something private in an oversharing world.
Makes sense. And marking history, Remembrance Sunday.
Yes, observed solemnly, led by King Charles III at the Cenotaph in London, with Prince George also notably participating this year, a significant moment of national reflection.
And sadly, the passing of a familiar face for UK viewers.
Yes. Quentin Wilson, former Top Gear presenter and also a well-known consumer rights advocate, passed away at age 68. A recognizable figure for many.
Okay, let's finish with sports. Quick highlights, rugby first.
Sure. In international rugby, the New Zealand All Blacks managed to hold off Scotland, despite getting 3 yellow cards playing with fewer men for significant parts of the game. resilience there.
And England.
England needed their bench strength, particularly the speed of Henry Arundel, to overcome a tough challenge from Fiji.
Okay. Football or soccer, depending where you are. Something unusual happened.
Huh. Yes, Sunderland apparently used a clever, maybe slightly cheeky tactic against Arsenal. They timed the movement of their digital advertising boards around the pitch to potentially disrupt the Arsenal players' rhythm and sightlines. And Sunderland won. So maybe it worked. Tactical ingenuity or bending the rules. Bit of debate there.
Always innovating. College football in the U.S. had some big games.
Absolutely thrilling finishes.
Yeah.
Number 2, ranked Indiana beat Penn State with a dramatic late catch right at the edge of the end zone, a real toe tapper. Number 9, Oregon squeaked past Iowa with a field goal very late in the game. And number 4, Alabama's defense really shut down LSU for a dominant win. Classic late season intensity.
Great stuff. And in women's sports.
North Korea secured their 4th FIFA Under-17 Women's World Cup title. A record. They beat the Netherlands convincingly, 3-0 in the final. Dominant performance.
So that brings us to the end of this deep dive. What a range we've covered. From, almost godlike control over genetics with CRISPR to re-examining brain circuits that are 500 million years old.
Right.
And then right back to the raw vulnerability of places like the Sikayana Atoll facing rising seas.
Yeah, and we saw that massive hype around AI, the projected $1.1 trillion investment, really hitting a wall of skepticism and market reality,
Rough.
forcing tech giants back to the government for help.
Even while quantum physics keeps throwing up results that basically force us to rewrite the textbooks.
Right. And all this happening while simultaneously you have major powers like NATO prepping for massive troop deployments, 800,000 potentially,
Yeah.
and completely unexpected diplomatic shifts, like the U.S. suddenly engaging with the new leadership in Syria, a leader who was on a terror list not long ago.
The underlying theme feels like this tension between control and chaos, doesn't it? We're gaining incredible control over the biology fundamental particles.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the macro global politics, climate stability seems increasingly chaotic, less predictable.
That's a great way to put it. We're mastering the internal world while the external world feels like it's spinning faster and faster.
So here's something for you, our listener, to maybe chew on this week. We've got this hyperspeed technological change, CRISPR, AI, quantum leaps happening way faster than our laws, our ethics, even our international relations can really keep up. Now, connect that acceleration to these sudden volatile geopolitical shifts like the U.S.-Syria rapprochement or the NATO preparations for potential large-scale conflict in Europe. What does this remind you of? Is there a parallel in the last century? Maybe a huge tech leap like the atomic bomb or a sudden diplomatic shock? Something that captures the same feeling of unpredictable tension between rapid innovation and global instability.
It's a powerful question. How are these incredible new scientific powers going to intersect with these old but intensified geopolitical struggles? Which force ultimately shapes the next decade, our drive to innovate or our tendency towards conflict?
Something to think about as you navigate your week. We'll be back next time for another deep dive.
Take care, everyone.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.